It's all untold.
All right, let's dive in. Today we're tackling the one and only Phil Lesh, the Grateful Dead's legendary bassist.
Seriously, legendary.
But we're not just hitting the highlights. We've got articles, bios, even some cool fan reflections.
Yeah, a real treasure trove.
Our mission, figuring out what made Phil's impact so unique. It's way more than just being a skilled musician, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, so many of these sources talk about him tapping into something bigger.
Like beyond the music itself.
Yeah, exactly. Not just a great bassist, but connecting with something deeper.
You see that a lot with icons. They transcend their role.
Right, they become a symbol.
So let's rewind to the beginning. Get this. Phil's first instrument wasn't even the bass.
It's true. Several sources mention his mom was a pianist, really nurtured his love for music early on.
I bet their house was full of music.
Oh, for sure. Shaping his ear.
Yeah.
But he actually started on trumpet around 9 years old.
Trumpet, I can't even picture that. It wasn't until he was about 15 that he switched.
Yeah, and apparently it just felt right. Like he found his true voice.
That's key, because we'll see how he breaks away from that typical bassist backup role.
Definitely. But hold on, we got a TTA talk about the 1960s Bay Area scene. All the sources paint this picture.
Oh, I know. Vibrant, creative, like a musical melting pot.
Exactly. That's where Phil and Jerry Garcia meet, bonding over their passion in these, legendary late-night jams.
Those jams are the stuff of legend. Perfect breeding ground for the Dead sound. But here's what gets Emmy. You have Phil, formerly trained musician.
Right, classical background and all.
Joining a band known for improvisation, was that tough for him?
I think it was more like creative tension.
Yeah.
Fueled their music,
Not clashing, but fusing.
Exactly. He had the chops for complex harmonies, but Jerry pushed him to break free, think on his feet.
And that's where those incredible melodic bass lines come in.
Oh, for sure. He wasn't just holding down the rhythm.
He was practically a lead instrument at times. No wonder he's considered a jam band pioneer.
Absolutely. And his influence goes way beyond just the Dead. Think Fish, Widespread Panic, countless bands.
It wasn't just skill, it was musicality, innovation. Speaking of which, Woodstock 69, that Dark Star performance.
Oh, man. People still talk about that one.
Peak improvisation, right? But Dark Star wasn't just random noodling.
No. The song's structure, loose as it was, provided a framework for those moments of brilliance.
Phil himself called it a musical canvas in an interview. I love that.
It really does capture their style. But it wasn't just the music either, was it?
Oh, you're talking about the Deadheads, that whole culture that grew around them.
Yeah. And the sources suggest a fascinating link between the music and those fans. These weren't passive listeners.
They wanted the unexpected, loved that journey each show took.
And Phil embraced that, connected with them personally, deepening that bond.
Created a community and experience beyond just listening.
One thing that struck me reading all this is how many sources mention Phil's approachability.
Oh, totally. Not some untouchable rock star.
Genuine connection with the fans.
He was down to earth, approachable, and actually grateful for that connection. Before we move on to Phil's life after Jerry, gotta ask about his bass sound. Sources mention unusual amplification technique.
Oh yeah, he was known for that.
To get this really unique tone.
Different cabinets, microphones, huge, almost orchestral sound.
Not just loud, but a whole soundscape.
Right, textured, enveloping the listener.
So his bass tone was as important as Jerry's guitar to their signature. That's wild.
It really was. Okay, so after Jerry's passing, many bands would have called it quits right there.
But not Phil.
Nope, Phil and friends. And it wasn't just nostalgia. He brought in new W musicians,
Kept that improvisational spirit going.
proving the music was bigger than any one lineup.
Powerful statement. This music evolves, lives on, which leads us to the Fare Thee Well shows, the 50th anniversary.
Oh man, those were poignant.
Yeah.
Moment of closure, celebrating 50 years, but also acknowledging what was lost.
You can feel the bittersweetness in the sources.
Definitely. But even beyond performing, Phil takes on these other roles: teacher, archivist.
Dedicating himself to that legacy.
Exactly. Mentoring young musicians, archiving recordings, dedication beyond most.
It wasn't about fame, it was about the music existing, evolving. It's mind-blowing how one bassist connects to so much. Innovation, fan culture, a whole philosophy, really. And speaking of connecting, those fan stories are powerful.
They really are.
Sarah talking about a soul connection at a small Phil and Friends show, Emily finding solace during tough times.
What's striking is how grounded they are. Not celebrity worship, it's genuine impact.
It humanizes the whole thing. And it's not just music. The sources touch on Phil's social activism, too.
It adds another layer, right? Making a positive impact, something that resonates with Deadheads.
Okay, I'm already blown away by how much we've uncovered.
Me too, and we've only just scratched the surface.
We need more time to dive into all this.
Agreed. But before we get ahead of ourselves, let's leave you with this thought. Knowing how Phil approached music, how important that live experience was, can a recording really capture it?
Ooh, that's a good one.
Is it just a pale shadow compared to being there in the moment, especially with a band like The Dead? All about improvisation.
It really makes you think about hearing versus experiencing. We'll be back soon to delve even deeper, so stay tuned for part 2 of our Phil Lesh adventure. Welcome back! Man, that question from last time about recordings versus live music, it's really stuck with me.
It's a tough one, isn't it?
Yeah, like you can hear the notes, but can you really feel what it was like to be there in that moment?
Especially with someone like Phil, all about that improvisation and audience connection.
It's almost like trying to describe a dream, you know?
I know what you mean. You can say what you saw, but the feeling's lost.
Exactly. And that actually brings us to something else fascinating about Phil's legacy. Those archival projects preserving the Dead's music.
Oh yeah, huge part of his work.
It wasn't just releasing albums, it was documenting the journey, capturing those unique performances.
He understood that each show was its own thing, a snapshot in time.
Like creating a sonic time capsule, letting future generations experience that magic, even if they weren't there.
And you know, there's this quote from Phil. He talks about giving back to the fans by making these recordings available.
Oh, I love
He
that.
was sharing something precious that belonged to everyone.
Not about profit, but sharing the gift of music itself. Speaking of giving back, let's go back to Phil's early days with the Dead.
Back to the beginning.
We talked about that creative tension between his classical training and the band's improv style, but it sounds like it was more than just a challenge.
Definitely. The sources suggest it actually inspired him.
Interesting.
Those late night jams with Jerry, forcing him out of the box, breaking free from rigid structures.
Embracing the spontaneity.
Right. Learning a whole new musical language, instinct, feeling, communication.
And bam, that's where those killer bass lines come from.
Absolutely. Classical training gave him the foundation, but then he went further, creating these intricate, improvised lines like nothing else out there.
It's like he was playing a different game. Most bassists were focused on rhythm, the foundation.
And holding it down.
But Phil's up there weaving melodies, interacting with Jerry, creating a whole other layer of conversation.
Exactly. A melodic architect, shaping the Dead's sound in a way no one else could.
Okay, I'm getting curious about his actual playing technique. Did the sources mention anything specific?
Oh yeah, there's an article about how he used a pick instead of his fingers.
A pick. Really?
Unusual for bassists back then. Gave him this percussive, almost piano-like attack.
Oh, that explains it. That percussive quality I always hear.
So much clarity and definition.
So, unique background, unconventional technique, add in the improv. No wonder he's a jam band legend.
That's the whole package.
Bands like Fish, Widespread Panic, you can hear his influence.
That blend of skill, melodic invention, and freedom, it's a direct line.
It's crazy how one person's vision can have such a ripple effect.
Inspiring a whole generation.
And it goes back to that willingness to push boundaries, explore the unknown. Speaking of unique, I wanted to touch on something else the sources mention. Phil's sense of humor.
Oh, yeah, he had a playful side.
Really? I always pictured him as the serious, intense musician.
He was, but there are all these stories about his pranks.
No way. Give me an example.
Well, apparently he once rigged a smoke machine to go off during a super quiet moment in a concert.
I'm picturing it now. The confusion, the laughter, the smoke filling the stage.
He just wanted to see how the audience would react.
That's hilarious. Reminds me that music is supposed to be fun. A little mischief never hurts.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think that playfulness grew people to him. He wasn't afraid to let loose, embrace the unexpected.
And that energy was contagious.
Oh, for sure. For bandmates, A&D fans.
Okay, loving this side of Phil. The prankster, the innovator, the adventurer. But back to the Deadheads for a minute. We talked about them embracing improv, but there's more, right?
Yeah, it goes deeper.
It wasn't just about the music itself.
It was the community, the shared experience, that sense of belonging.
A whole culture around the band.
They traveled from show to show, traded tapes, shared stories, made lifelong friends.
Their own little world.
Music was the common language.
And Phil embraced that. He saw the fans as an extension of the band, partners in the journey.
It wasn't us versus them, it was collective, a shared celebration.
Life, love, music.
Something really special beyond the typical artist-fan thing.
Speaking of that relationship, it's amazing how many fan stories talk about personal connections with Phil.
Yeah, not just meeting a famous guy.
Genuine interactions, shared values.
There's this story about him taking time to talk to fans after a show, answering questions, sharing stories.
Wow, making them feel like they were part of something bigger.
It's that personal touch that sets him apart.
No wonder he inspired such loyalty. It's those small gestures, those moments of connection that create lasting memories.
They solidify that bond between artist and audience.
You know, it's making me realize the Grateful Dead, they were more than a band, they were a phenomenon.
A movement, a way of life, even.
And Phil was at the heart of it all.
Driving the music forward, connecting with everyone, creating something truly special.
I couldn't agree more. It's a story that goes way beyond the notes on a page.
Community, creativity, the power of music to bring people together.
Okay, I'm feeling inspired. But before we get too philosophical, let's tackle what happened after Jerry's passing.
All right, back to the timeline.
How did Phil navigate that loss, both personally and musically?
That's a great question, and one that we're going to explore in more detail in the next part of our deep dive.
Ooh, a cliffhanger.
We'll look at how he coped with losing his friend and partner, how he kept the dead spirit alive through Phil and friends.
And ultimately, how he honored the past while embracing the future.
It's a journey.
Stay tuned for part 3 of our deep dive into the incredible life and music of Phil Lesh. Welcome back to our Phil Lesh deep dive. You know, throughout this whole journey, one thing that really strikes me is Phil's resilience.
Oh, absolutely.
It can't be easy losing a close friend, A&D musical partner, but he kept going.
You really feel that in the sources.
Honoring the past while still moving forward, so how'd he do it? Musically, I mean, after such a loss.
Well, that's where Phil and Friends comes in.
Right.
Not just a tribute act, but a way to explore new territory, collaborate, keep that improv flame alive.
And looking at this interview, he talks about playing with new musicians, bringing a fresh perspective.
Yeah, like hearing those familiar Dead songs in a whole new light.
Rediscovering his own legacy through others' eyes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just reinterpreting the old stuff either.
He was writing new material, too.
Oh yeah, pushing himself, showing he wasn't content to just, coast.
Definitely not coasting. And speaking of pushing himself, those Fare Thee Well shows, for the 50th anniversary, that had to be emotional.
Oh, incredibly so.
The weight of 50 years, reuniting with bandmates, but that absence.
Celebration, commemoration, farewell, all at once.
Like a culmination of everything we've talked about.
It really was.
Music, community, legacy. How did the sources say Phil approached those shows?
There's a quote. He says he wanted to create a shared experience for the fans.
I like that.
Honoring the past, but also pointing toward the future. Acknowledging the loss, but celebrating what remains.
So powerful. And again, that theme of community shines through. It wasn't about him solo. It was about the fans, that shared history, being part of something bigger.
He understood. The Dead was more than a band. It was a movement, a phenomenon.
A way of life for some people.
And Fare Thee Well, let everyone come together,
Yeah.
acknowledge that, say goodbye to an era, but T also embrace what's next.
Even beyond those shows, there's this whole other side to Phil, the teacher, the archivist.
Oh, absolutely crucial to his legacy.
He could have just retired after Fare Thee Well, but he kept going.
Sharing his knowledge, making sure the music lived on.
I'm reading about Terrapin Crossroads, his music venue and community center.
I love that place.
It's like he wanted to build a physical space for that same community, that musical exploration.
Generosity, spirit, giving back.
Oh,
And then there's the work with the Dead's archives.
Oh, right, preserving all those recordings.
Countless hours of live shows, making sure those moments weren't lost.
Musician Ene historian. He understood preserving the past for the future.
Not letting those memories fade, making them accessible, sharing the gift.
And thinking back to all those fan stories we discussed, the connections, the gratitude, it's clear he succeeded.
With that,
He touched so many lives.
with his music, his generosity, his commitment to something